the kind of nihilistic thinking that any civilized nation should eliminate.
Did you see those messages they sent to you, naming you when they beheaded these American journalists?
Yeah.
They had messages addressing you personally. Did you watch them?
You know, I review as part of our overall counterterrorism effort. I review all the social media that many of these groups, and this isn't the first organization to deploy social media. Right. This is increasingly the way that they're recruiting, particularly among foreign fighters, and we need a much more effective counter-narrative, and it can't come from us. I mean, because the problem...
I'm just curious, when they address you like that and they behead an American, I mean, how does that impact you?
Well, you know, when you... It's not so much how it affects me personally. It's thinking about the parents of and family members of these folks who are affected. That never goes away, and you understand that you know, the way to vindicate the love and concern that these families have is to make sure we've got a good policy, a smart policy that prevents these kinds of things from happening in the future.
Assad, we're essentially putting aside that priority that Assad must go because ISIS is a more direct threat?
You know, the reason we're in this situation is because Assad brutalized his people and specifically brutalized a Sunni population that is the majority in Syria. It's going to be hard for us to attract Sunnis to fight against ISIL in this area if they think that we're doing it on behalf of Assad. So our attitude towards Assad continues to be that you know, through his actions, through using chemical weapons on his own people, dropping barrel bombs that kill innocent children, that he has foregone legitimacy. But when it comes to our policy and the coalition that we're putting together, our focus specifically is on ISIL. It's narrowly on ISIL. We will continue to look for opportunities, even as we're going after terrorists who could harm Americans and our friends and partners in the region. We'll continue to look for opportunities to see if we can arrive at a political resolution of the challenges of Syria. We're going to need that, but in order to do that, we've actually got to have a moderate Sunni opposition. Right now in Syria, you've got a choice in the minds of a lot of people between radical Sunni extremists or Assad. But
that's not a choice.
That's not a choice. We've got, and what we know is that there are millions of decent, good Sunnis, many of whom have been displaced. They're in Turkey, they're in Jordan. Many of them are still in Syria, although getting squeezed between these two extremes. And we've got to be able to reach to them, find a military and political structure that allows them to express themselves. Then maybe we can get the kind of political resolution that we need.
All right, let me move on to a few other topics. Ebola. There's some anxiety in the country about it. Obviously, it's something that Africa's trying to get its hands around, but there's obviously anxiety in the United States.
Yeah.
How concerned are you, and how concerned should Americans be?
Well, Americans shouldn't be concerned about the prospects of contagion here in the United States short term, because this is not an airborne disease.
I noticed you said short term, though.
Well, I'm going to get to that. It's not an airborne disease like the flu. You can only catch it through the transmission of bodily fluids. Where you have a strong public health infrastructure, then typically there's one person who's identified or a couple of people who identified as having the virus, isolate them, run through a real tight protocol, and it gets contained pretty effectively. The problem that we've got is in right now a limited portion of Western Africa, primarily, especially in Liberia, but also Sierra Leone, Guinea.
Tragically, a part of Africa that economically had been booming.
Yeah,
and all of a sudden, I mean, this is
they'd been making some significant progress, but they didn't have a public health infrastructure. So now what you have is what should be a containable problem breaking loose because people aren't being quarantined properly, people aren't being trained properly, there aren't enough public health workers. So what I've said, and I said this 2 months ago to our national security team, is we have to make this a national security priority. We have to mobilize the international community, get resources in there. We're going to have to use...
It's going to be U.S.-led effort.
As usual. And we're going to have to get U.S. military assets just to set up, for example, isolation units and equipment there to provide security for public health workers surging from around the world. If we do that, then it's still going to be months before this problem is controllable in Africa, but it shouldn't reach our shores. Now, here's the last point I'm going to make. If we don't make that effort now, and this spreads not just through Africa, but other parts of the world, there's the prospect then that the virus mutates, it becomes more easily transmittable, and then it could be a serious danger to the United States. This is an example of where U.S. leadership is important in dealing with crisis, but it's also an argument for why when I go before Congress and I say, let's give some public health aid to countries like Liberia so that they can set up hospitals and nurses and vaccinations, et cetera. You know, sometimes, the American public says, why are we wasting money on them? Well, part of it is because when we make those short-term investments now, it really pays off a lot of dividends in the future.
When we go to immigration, you made a decision to delay any executive action until after the election. What do you tell the person that's going to get deported before the election that this decision was essentially made in your hopes of saving a Democratic Senate?
Well, that's not the reason. A couple of things that I want to say about immigration. Number one, I have been consistent about why this is important. The country is going to be better off if we have an immigration system that works, that has strong border security, that has streamlined our legal immigration system so the best and the brightest who want to stay here and invest here and create jobs here can do so, that families can be unified, and that a system where the millions of people who are here in many cases for a decade or more, who have American kids, who are our neighbors, oftentimes are our friends, that they have a path to get legal by paying taxes and getting above board, paying a fine, learning English if they have to. So the good news is we have bipartisan support for that. We have a Senate bill that would accomplish that. The House Republicans refused to do it, and what I said to them was, if you do not act on something that's so common sense that you got labor, business, evangelicals, law enforcement, you got folks across the board supporting it, then I'm going to look for all the legal authorities I have to act. What we've now done is lay the groundwork for that. Jay Johnson, the head of the Department of Homeland Security, has presented me preliminary ideas in terms of how we can take executive action. And what I've determined is I want to make sure we get it right. I want to make sure, number one, that all the T's are crossed.
Looks like politics. I mean, it looks like election year politics.
Not only do I want to make sure that the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted, but here's the other thing, Chuck, and I'm being honest now, about the politics of it. This problem with unaccompanied children that we saw a couple of weeks ago, where you had from Central America a surge of kids who were showing up at the border, got a lot of attention. And a lot of Americans started thinking, we've got this immigration crisis on our hands. Now, the fact of the matter is that the number of people apprehended crossing our borders has plummeted over the course of the decade. It's far lower than it was 10 years ago. And in terms of these unaccompanied children, we've actually systematically worked through the problem so that the surge in June dropped in July, dropped further in August. It's now below what it was last year. But that's not the impression on people's minds. And what I want to do is, when I take executive action, I want to make sure that it's sustainable. I want to make sure
the public's
that
not behind you. You're not taking it. It sounds a little bit like you're concerned the public wouldn't support what you did.
What I'm saying is that I'm going to act because it's the right thing for the country, but it's going to be more sustainable and more effective if the public understands what the facts are on immigration, what we've done on unaccompanied children, and why it's necessary. And the truth of the matter is that the politics did shift midsummer because of that problem. I want to spend some time, even as we're getting all our ducks in a row for the executive action, I also want to make sure that the public understands why we're doing this, why it's the right thing for the American people, why it's the right thing for the American economy.
What's the rationale for this election? I'm going to be a little cynical here. $3 billion, I would argue, is being decided to see if it's Harry Reid or Mitch McConnell that's in charge of gridlock in the Senate. I mean, we're talking either, what's the difference between a 2-seat Democratic majority and a 2-seat Republican majority as far as your agenda is concerned?
Well, I tell you what. First of all, there's a sharp difference between the Democratic agenda and the Republican agenda. And the American people need to know that. If you've got a Democratic Senate, that means bills are being introduced to raise the minimum wage. That's something Democrats support. We think America needs a raise.
Where's that on your desk?
I'll get to that. Equal pay for equal work. We care about that. The Republicans, that's not their priority. We think it's important to make sure that issues like family leave and family-friendly policies and more effective child care are in place so that folks are getting help, that young people are getting more assistance when it comes to paying for college educations, rebuilding our infrastructure, putting folks back to work on our roads, our bridges, all of which would boost our economy now and boost it into the future. On all those issues, there is a sharp contrast. Now, it is true that if the House stays Republican, that it's unlikely that I get a lot of these bills to my desk. But it makes a big difference if we've got at least one branch in Congress that is presenting these ideas, making arguments. There is, I think, hopefully an opportunity for us to do something like tax reform next year. But is that tax reform going to be just for folks at the top? Or is it going to be tax reform that closes some corporate loopholes and gives middle-class folks a break? And I know that given the gridlock that we've seen over the last couple of years, it's easy to say that these midterms don't matter, but the fact of the matter is